Hello, everyone. I'm Christina Martin. I'm one of the directors of the Children's School. Welcome to this panel discussion on the role of schools in promoting racial and social justice. For those of you who don't know us, the Children's School is a progressive school. And two central tenets of progressive education are educating the whole child and educating children for participation in democracy. Therefore, progressive schools are firmly and completely in the camp of working towards racial and social justice for students, teachers, families, and communities. At the Children's School, we do some very good work around equity and justice-oriented teaching and learning. I am proud of our comprehensive social justice curricular goals that we've written for students grades K through 8. I'm proud of the continued hard work by our teachers to question, critique, and decenter whiteness so that our commitment to justice lives and breathes each day in our classrooms. I'm proud of our students who embrace ideals of equity and bring their own creativity and energy to a variety of causes. But I'm always aware that as much as we talk the talk at the Children's School, I'm also aware of the need to continually push ourselves to walk the walk. It would be easy if all we had to do to end racism is just say that we're anti-racist. But unfortunately, that's not going to be enough to dismantle an entrenched historic and current system of white supremacy. We need to continually work to find new ways of being that are anti-racist, to live anti-racism, and to help our students do the same. Tonight, I look forward to learning from our panel, Anthony Clark, Melissa Barone, and Matthew Ehrlich, three people with expertise and insights to offer about living anti-racism. I want to close with a quote from actress and playwright Bea Richards. She said, "Both class and race survive education, and neither should." What is education then? If it doesn't help a human being recognize that humanity is humanity, what is it for? I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to tell us what education is for and what schools can do to promote racial justice. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Clark, and from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate all of you taking time out of your extremely busy schedules to be here this evening. I would like to thank the Children's School, for your continued investment in our community and beyond. It's truly appreciated, and I'm humbled that I was asked to be a part of this wonderful event. So I'm not going to take up too much time because I know we have some, important questions to answer, and I'm sure those in attendance have some questions they would like to ask or maybe some critiques to share. But again, my name is Anthony Clark. My parents moved to the OPRF community when I was 5 years old, from the south side of Chicago, the Morgan Park area, the hood. And, I've been in this community ever since. And for me, just quickly, I think we all are here because we understand the roles that schools play in our community. Schools are the backbones and the driving force of our communities. Whether we're talking about a public school in which property taxes are funded into, private schools, charter schools, so on and so forth, families and individuals often move to communities and decide to lay roots and lay a foundation in communities based upon the school systems. So if you have a thriving school system, generally the correlation is going to be a thriving community. If you have a struggling school system, generally the correlation is going to be you often have a struggling community. So I just want to quickly share my educational journey, and then we'll go from there. When I first came to this community, I entered into St. Edmunds. It was a private school in Oak Park. I lasted in St. Edmunds until about 6th grade, when I was honestly kicked out of St. Edmunds for fighting. Again, this is no ill will or any ill intention towards the St. Edmunds community, because I truly love that community. But as a young Black male growing up in Oak Park who was attending a private institution, the work that we're here to do tonight and to talk about, I felt was lacking within that school system. And we often reap what we sow. So there was a lot of struggle. I actually was kicked out for not only fighting for myself against bullies, but the moment I was asked to leave was because I was defending a young Jewish kid who happened to have been bullied and attacked by an individual who also bullied me. So when I defended that child, I was asked to leave. From there, I went to Emerson. From Emerson, I went to Oak Park and River Forest High School, and then I went on to my adult journey. I'm now a teacher. I've taught in CPS, I've taught in charter, I've taught in alternative in the Chicago area, and now, of course, I'm back at Oak Park and River Forest High School, and I've been teaching for 13 years now. And in my role as a teacher, I'm also a community organizer and activist and founder and director of the nonprofit Suburban Unity Alliance. So I'm not going to get too deep into that now. But essentially, why I'm here tonight and why I accepted coming is because we have to go beyond teaching math and science and history and English. What good is it for your child, in my opinion, to understand an algebraic problem or to be able to recite Shakespeare if they don't understand or have ownership of themselves in their own community, if they don't feel like they belong, or if they don't feel like they can truly articulate or defend themselves when they are attacked oftentimes for simply being who they are to no fault of their own. So schools have to move beyond just academia and truly invest into the social aspects of creating a global citizen. And that holistic approach is why we're here tonight. I look forward to hearing from the other panelists. I look forward to hearing from all of you. And thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. It's really great to be on this panel with you and for everyone else to be here. I really appreciate it. My name is Melissa Barone. I am one of the middle level teachers at the Children's School. This is my 4th year at the Children's School and 4th year teaching in general. I was introduced to the progressive kind of model and the Children's School early in my undergraduate program. So I was able to see that kind of holistic practice and that we really were, school is more than just kind of rote memorization and listening to and redirecting to do what your teachers did. And I knew I wanted to become a middle level teacher because so many of even myself and my like kids I went to school with, like middle school broke us down, and then you had to rebuild your identity and get yourself back up and develop confidence. And I knew I wanted to become a teacher that could support the growth of students. And I just didn't know what that looked like until I was introduced to the Children's School. And so that partnered with Northeastern universities, kind of really wanting to make sure that teachers are culturally competent and making sure that they can support their students in the way that they need it, was really what drove me into justice-oriented teaching. So once I got a job at the Children's School, I was really able to foster that passion through, social justice is expected to be part of the curriculum. Like what Anthony was saying, like at the Children's School, we have this opportunity to make that part of our curriculum and make sure students' voices are heard throughout that as well. So that's been really positive. And then also just having opportunities to initiate my own ideas, such as the Social Justice Summer League that we saw some great art on the previous slide that our student Kat created for us through that. So that's been a really great opportunity. And I'm happy to be here for this discussion, to hear from all of you and hear from the other panelists. So I'll pass it on to my former student, Matthew.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Ehrlich. I'm a now alum of the Children's School. I was there from kindergarten through 8th grade. Enjoyed it. It was the best school I could have asked for during the time of my life. And I'm so grateful for the experiences I've had there. That's why I'm back. I now attend St. Ignatius College Prep, where I'm a part of the anti-racism, anti-bias cohort and school diversity committee. I work with various people to change school policies around social justice, encourage social justice programming in the school, and we're progressing on that throughout the year. But I can attribute my interest in justice and social justice to my time at the Children's School, really. That's one of the foundational parts of me finding my voice in justice and wanting to continue that throughout my life, the fight for racial and social justice. You could see we have teachers here at the Children's School that are dedicated to encouraging that voice in youth which is the most important part of pursuing social justice. So that was absolutely very important to me, and I'm happy to be here tonight working on the good work. So thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Miranda Johnson. I'm a parent at the Children's School. I have a son in the 6th grade and a daughter in the 3rd grade. And I also work at Loyola University Chicago School of Law, where I'm the director of our Education Law and Policy Institute. And we started thinking about this topic really because of how monumental the events over the last year have been, particularly the racial reckoning that we experienced last summer, and then the tremendous momentum for racial justice and anti-racism work. So we've been engaged in that work at the Children's School as part of an ongoing conversation. And I thought that this was a great opportunity to engage in dialogue with the community and talk about where we've come and what the challenges are ahead, and get your thoughts. We're so delighted to have so many wonderful participants here today. So what we envision is that I'll ask each of the panelists a few questions, and we'll have a conversation and dialogue among the panelists. And then we'll open it up for questions from the audience, and questions can be submitted using the chat. You can send those to Christina Martin via chat message, and then we'll field questions to the panelists. So my first question is really kind of an overall framing question. And we're starting this discussion, but let's go deeper. So for each of the panelists, what do you see as the role of schools related to promoting racial and social justice? And what is the role in terms of the community, right? How can schools work with the community in terms of responding to the needs that are surfacing? So Matthew, as our student member, we're going to start with you.
All right, well, I would say schools are the way to promote racial and social justice. There really is no better way, in my view, because justice requires action, and who's doing the action. And no offense to my adults in this call, but the youth are fundamental to the action. And not just the action, culture. How is this justice playing out over generations? And how will next generations understand race and injustice? And that's all of what a school's job is. Schools ask us how we will understand mathematics, science, language in future generations, and they teach us how to approach those topics. So providing a means to understand and apply understanding is what a school's job really is. Not to mention, schools teach us about social studies and civics. And this is something that in my school, we were taught about regarding a school's job in affirming political and social truths, specifically around the protests and Capitol riots of earlier this year, around the false narrative of President Donald Trump winning the 2020 election. So if you teach us how the election process works, you teach us how to vote, you teach us how someone wins, isn't it also your responsibility to affirm what is true after an election, or when false narratives are being pushed around your school? So it's a school's job to say what is true in our social realm, and how well, what are now students, but will go on to be citizens, will participate in that process. So with regard to social and racial justice, a school's job isn't just providing means to understand, also to encourage our youth to live justice in their lives. So that means encouraging clubs, events like this, anything that will give insight to students on having a voice in social justice and pursuing it in the law. So that's really what it means to me for a school to promote racial and social justice. A community is really the same. A community fosters a school. So a community is really what makes up the school. The students in the school are part of the community, the parents of the students. and that will take place in the school around social justice should be open to the community, because the community is made up of people that already are partaking in the political process, and possibly have more experience in social change. So for students to have into what is happening, what has happened, is just as important as them looking to the future and how they'll apply their thoughts in the future. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you, Matthew. That was awesome. I truly enjoyed listening to you and learning from you. Again, I want to just preface this with I make I statements. I never want to overgeneralize or speak for anyone else. So what I share are my opinions and my ideology. But I think when we look at supremacy, white supremacy, I think it's important for us to take a step back. I'm sorry, I have paint on my hand. That's funny. We were doing the community fridge earlier. We had to paint it. But when we take a step back, we have to understand that white supremacy is at an institutional systemic level. I think too often when individuals think of white supremacy, we think at an individual level. You may hear narratives such as, I or my family never owned or enslaved anyone. I am not racist, or my children are not racist, or, in any form of oppression, right? Because we go beyond simply racism. We could talk about I am not sexist, or my children are not sexist. But as Miranda stated earlier, it's not enough not to be racist or not to be sexist or not to be Islamophobic or homophobic. You have to work to be anti. And in that term, anti is where we look into action. What action steps are we taking? And I'm not in your homes, I'm not telling you how to raise your children, but I know how my parents raised me. And they didn't take a submissive approach, essentially, sit back and hope that the school would provide me with all the tools necessary to create and become a human being and a citizen that truly respected everyone while recognizing my privilege, along with the level of oppression that I experience as a Black male in society. And we have to recognize that not every school is going to take the steps that the children's school is attempting to take in being active, being anti. So often parents are hoping that the school does the work. Meanwhile, your child is coming home, and often, let's be honest, I'm a teacher, they're being inundated or over inundated with those Pearson type books that come from Texas that are just oversaturated with the white narrative, with a white supremacist narrative. So you don't have to be actively a white supremacist. You don't even have to be white to perpetuate white supremacy, just simply based upon how you are teaching or how you are interacting with your students, with your children, or with your community and society. So I just wanted to preface it with that, to understand that that anti should and must come before everything. It's not enough not to be, we have to be anti-racist, right? So what does that actually look like? So for me, because the school systems failed to provide me with the type of lessons and materials and curriculum needed to create an individual that aimed to utilize their privilege to empower others, my parents had to do that at home. And because the schools didn't support that, my parents had to do their own research. Now, mind you, this is after 40, 50, 60 hours a week of work. This is after cooking meals. This is after cleaning. This is after running behind me to make sure that I'm not in trouble and that I'm safe. Then they had to bring in material, books, so on and so forth, and various items to introduce me to people like Martin Luther King at a higher level. Because, right, schools talk about MLK, but do they really dig deep to truly understand what MLK represented? I didn't learn about Malcolm X in school. I definitely didn't learn about Chairman Fred Hampton in school, who's actually behind me in this picture. If you saw Judas and the Black Messiah, Angela Davis, Rosa Parks, schools never truly dug deep to truly investigate who these individuals were, what their ideologies were, and what their work was. And all of these individuals that I named truly believed in intersectional movements to where you identified and appreciated your own individual identity within a collective, a Black male, a Black woman, a trans man, so on and so forth, but as a collective, the importance of intersectionality and coming together to recognize that an issue shouldn't have to directly impact you to impact you. And that's why I feel like the role of schools like the children's school come into play, because not only should the school be actively working to provide and encourage their teachers to expand beyond the general and normal curriculum that is often provided to school systems and teachers, they should also be working to provide parents with outside materials so when their child comes home, that continued lesson can be reinforced, going beyond just simply academia, going into the social aspects of being a complete human being. And I think that's what's lacking in many of our school systems, schools not taking an active approach in supporting parents to say, hey, here's an email, here's some good literature about sexism, here's some good literature about Islamophobia, so on and so forth. And even beyond that, of course, we have wonderful teachers and individuals that can speak to the issue. But say, for example, and I'm not saying this happened, but as an example, the children's school wanted to do a lesson or an initiative around addressing the systemic issue of sexism, misogyny, and rape culture. Now, as a man, I inherently benefit from each. I inherently benefit from each. I have privilege. So it wouldn't be right for me to come in to this initiative and teach. It's important that schools also bring in expertise and bring in talent if it doesn't already exist within the building to also additionally support curriculum and initiatives to get that anti into the equation. So if you're talking about Islamophobia, you better have someone who is a Muslim who practices Islam, to teach, to reach out and to teach about the culture and to broaden horizons. If you're talking about racism, yes, of course you have wonderful teachers, but make sure you also have somebody that's directly impacted by this issue. So that's huge and important, while also, again, providing parents with those outside resources that can support parents in raising their children. And I think that's what's really lacking in our school systems today. So again, I'm impressed, with the children's school, stepping up and continuing this work. But as parents and as schools, we cannot rest on the laurels of a school can't be in a situation or position to say, well, the parents are going to take care of it. And parents and guardians can't be in a position to say, well, the school is going to take care of it. This is so important that both have to take care of it. Both have to be active. Both have to be anti and collaborate, work together, whether that be a liaison, but there needs to be an active communication channel between the school and the household to discuss these issues. And we could continue on, but I know we have so much more to talk about. But those are just my general ideas because, again, schools are the backbones of our community. They drive our community. They lead our students to being either leaders or not. Either we're going to raise children to accept status quo and not question, because let's be honest, schools have played a direct role in perpetuating supremacy and perpetuating patriarchy. Schools play a direct role in that. Think about how schools are often situated and structured and teaching a structure to where women and those who identify are marginalized. People of color, Black, brown, and other people of color are marginalized, and often whiteness is what's celebrated. We have to flip that on its head and celebrate all, represent all, and empower all. And that's directly done, again, from being active with curriculum, with supports and outreach to parents, with parents reaching out to the schools. And you have that simultaneous, cohesive working relationship to where parents shouldn't have to go research on their own for materials. And schools, shouldn't just be presenting math and science. Schools should be talking about Chairman Fred Hampton. Schools should be talking about Malcolm X and Angela Davis and so on and so forth, to be purposeful in our efforts to create global citizenship.
So I'm probably going to just parrot a lot of what Matthew and Anthony shared. But just to kind of Matthew's points, I do feel like schools will be and are the driving force in progressing us towards a just society. I think that it should be a place for students to question and investigate and really understand the complexities of injustice. And I think you get there by fostering and honoring identities. I think it's a lot of work, especially like in the early years and even in the middle level, where I teach, is just making sure students know that they have a voice, know that they can advocate for themselves. And I mean, I'm sure, Matthew, we could speak to this, the amount of conversations that we had about racial and social injustice that year with you is just us being able to be in an environment where I'm not knocking that down as something that's not appropriate or something that's not part of the math lesson. Like, we'll pause everything and have that discussion. So yeah, I think just making sure there's a community in your classroom that's fostering that and allowing students to bring their own questions, to bring their own opinions in. And then with that being said, making sure we provide students and teachers ourselves too, doing this work of like, how can we provide them the skills to have these conversations in a way that's productive and respectful. And so kind of doing a lot of establishing of community early on and setting certain expectations and even languaging, right? We talked a lot about using, Anthony even said, using I statements. You know, we have our students do that as well. And then I think the other thing outside of the classroom is just like developing equitable systems at an institutional level and within the school that students participate in. So if that's through hiring or restorative justice in place of, you know, your typical disciplinary system, and even kind of making sure, like, personally, like, my professional development as a white woman has been studying racial injustice as much as I can and how I can foster those conversations with my students. You know, like, I came in to the children's school ready to do a social justice project because I felt like, whoa, I'm behind. You know, I've been on the northwest side of Chicago most of my life, and I know that I haven't been doing the work I needed to. So bringing that energy with students that, like, this is something that's important. This is something we can discuss. This is something we can take action about. And then the final thing I was thinking about is like making sure that we're supporting students and recognizing like their personal responsibility to stand up to injustice and exclusion. So that's what I was thinking. And I feel like a lot of it comes down to fostering students' identity and self-confidence so that they even feel they're one, being seen, and they're being heard, so that they see opportunities to share what's on their mind. Because I know after 4 years with these middle level students, like, they are looking into society and they are making judgments and they have a lot to share and a lot to look into. And then in terms of community, I think it can be a challenge at times, but definitely something that I've worked hard to do is using our project-based learning and trying to reach out to the community and see what's going on. Like, even this past spring, when schools were closed, and we earlier in the year just happened to learn about Little Village and some like the environmental racism they were experiencing early in the school year when we were studying camping. So like, that's an example of like, we were studying camping, but I'm going to bring in environmental racism. We're going to talk about that too. So we talked about that earlier. And then during the pandemic, they were experiencing high levels of pollution. So we started making masks, and I connected with a local organization that I found there really through social media. And then the summer with the Social Justice Summer League, I was just trying to do the same thing, like, what's already going on in the community of Oak Park and these nearby Chicago areas, because there's a lot of work happening. And so how can I reach out and support, but also like receive support in return? So I think it's, to Anthony's part, it takes a village, and there's so many people that have to be involved to move this forward. But I think schools have a really important role in moving us towards a just society.
Thank you. What fantastic dialogue. So let's, Melissa, you just started us on examples, right? Like, what's happening in classrooms. So I want to see if each of you can talk about an example, either from your own classrooms or something that you've seen of a way in which a school is effectively fostering racial and social justice conversations. So Melissa, why don't you start this time?
Yeah, when I thought about this question, one of my first projects came to mind. So it was the second project of the year, and I definitely persuaded my class to move towards, like, we should really study a problem in society. Like, you just study mythical creatures and you got so bored. So like, maybe we should try a problem instead. And they ended up selecting stereotypes. And I think part of the reason that got there was because about 2 weeks previously, that was when 2 Black men were arrested at Starbucks in Philadelphia for just existing. And they were really kind of confused by that experience. And so I think then we had talked about stereotypes a little bit in class and implicit bias. And so I think their choice of the project came out of that dialogue. And so as we started diving into like me seeing what their understanding of a stereotype was, there was a lot of like, I see everyone the same. I don't judge people based on so and so. And so I was like, okay. Or I even asked them, I was like, what are some stereotypes you know about? And a lot of my students like couldn't name any. So I was like, okay, so is the project now that I have to tell you this stuff, or I'm not sure what's going on. So I had told them about an implicit bias test that I took. And I just told them about the experience and introduced them to this idea. And they insisted on taking it themselves. And I was a little tentative to it, but as if any of you have taken it before, if you had a few like 11 and 12-year-olds taking that, they were a little bit confused, and some were like really upset by their results. So that definitely caused some cognitive dissonance for them. And something I didn't expect either, like students like wanted to run out of the hallway, there was tears, like it was a lot for them. So we followed that confusion with watching the documentary called Ethnic Notions, which I feel like does a really good job of showing how media and entertainment has conditioned anti-Blackness. And so then they started seeing that through like century of time up to like the 1980s, kind of seeing how advertising and entertainment has been used to foster white supremacy and in doing so create this conditioning of anti-Blackness. And so that was really difficult learning for a lot of them. It was new to a lot of people. And in terms of community at that time, I was sending many newsletters home with resources about what's happening, how they can talk to their students at home. But with that being said, I noticed some apathy that was developing. I noticed that they felt like, how do you resolve this problem? Because they were finally understanding it. And so that's when I made this shift to, which has been an ongoing challenge in some ways, but definitely something I keep in mind, is like that balance between studying the oppression and the problem with examples of, success and resistance. And so after we had that experience, we shifted to studying activists, and students got to choose what kind of activists they wanted. So that's when they had opportunities. Like some students were really into like environmental justice. And so then they got to study, an activist in that lens. And so that was helpful to kind of rein them back in and avoid that apathy and feeling of just like, I can't do anything to help. And then what actually formulated after a lot of discussion is they created a art gallery. And when they had that idea, I was a little nervous. I was like, are they going to create an art gallery that just like shows a bunch of examples of stereotypes? Like, what is that going to look like? And instead, this group of students wanted to create an art gallery that anyone could walk into and feel acknowledged and empowered about their own identity. So it went like a totally different route. And I really saw how that shift in balance and seeing like resistance and seeing examples of activism helped them to create a positive mission and feel like they were doing work to better the lives of anyone that got to walk into our art gallery. So I think that's one I'll be talking about for a while, but I'm just really glad that the Children's School has like offered me the opportunity to foster the development of projects like that.
Wonderful. There was a few things that Melissa shared, that I kind of want to piggyback on. First and foremost, individuals, institutions, families, you cannot be afraid to become uncomfortable. Change does not occur without discomfort or a level of discomfort. So I truly appreciate Melissa sharing that, in the sense of, because we all have fear, right? Institutions have fear, individuals have fear, as teachers, we have fear in our classrooms, as parents and guardians, you have fear in your home. And of course, our students have fear as well, but we cannot be afraid to be uncomfortable. And one thing that Melissa also shared that I think is extremely important with this work is, I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to use this as an example again, if we're talking about sexism, as a male, I inherently benefit. I don't have to think in my mind that I'm actively a sexist to not understand that I inherently benefit from sexism. I have a level of privilege. And I think often what occurs when this work is taking place, whether at an institutional or individual level, is those that have privilege and benefit are often attacked and ostracized. And it's inherent, it's human nature. When you're attacked, when someone comes to you and says you're part of the problem, you are to blame, people often close their ears. They no longer want to listen, and then they retreat or either become defensive and then go on the attack. But one thing that I learned, and this actually came from a wonderful woman named Brenda Tracy, who has a movement called Set the Expectations that we actually brought into the OPRF community to address rape culture and sexism, is she presents a narrative of, if you are part of the problem, you have an opportunity to be part of the solution. So that's activating, that's providing individuals with the idea and the belief that, yes, I benefit from this, I'm part of the problem, but I can actively work to support individuals that are oppressed with this issue and be part of the solution. So you shift from a model of defensiveness and, I'm closed off and I'm just going to disappear or become defensive to, okay, what can I do to support you? What can I do to help you? And there's a multitude of ways to engage in these type of efforts, but that's an important shift. And Melissa shared that, and that's one way she's, engaging her class, is helping them understand that they are part of the solution. While we search for solutions, you are part of the solution by using your privilege to empower others and using yourself as a microphone to magnify others' voices, to help them. Something else that I wanted to mention as well is there's a lot of nuance in this work, and within institutions and schools and in homes as well. Say, for example, and it doesn't have to be for example, because unfortunately this occurs, a Black man, woman, or they is gunned down by a police officer, and you have school the next day. I've seen it to where institutions, while they recognize this has occurred, they ignore it because they are uncomfortable. They don't know necessarily how to respond. But meanwhile, we have teachers, adults, as well as students entering into the building that are impacted, that are distracted, that are harmed, that are hurt. And they're often looking for some level of support or sympathy, some level of acknowledgement that this has occurred and we recognize that it impacts you. So even at that smallest level, an institution sending out an email or a message to teachers and to students stating that this occurred, this is our statement, here are links to support you. If you're feeling impacted, this is where you can go and this is who you can talk to. Again, going back to that additional support with curriculum, additional support with materials, and acknowledging the issue. Sometimes that's all it takes. You don't have to know the answer, but acknowledge it and acknowledge that individuals are impacted. And that goes a long way at an institutional level. And believe me, not every institution does it. And it leads to despair. It leads to a deteriorating of the culture within a building because you feel ignored. So that's one thing that's extremely important as well. So again, shifting from a blame model to an empowering model, even for those that have privilege, and not empowering them further within that privilege, but empowering them to understand that they can be part of the solution, the nuance that's involved. And a clear example of this, for example, I run a nonprofit. One of the things that we engaged in that I'm extremely proud of is, one, there's two things that we did at the D200 level. We changed the racial equity policy and we changed the sexual assault policy. And it all started with essentially providing a platform for our students. We have different student clubs and groups. So we have social justice clubs and social justice groups, and providing them with a platform to identify the issue first and foremost. And once they identified the issue, we worked directly with the youth to mobilize. And again, this was not easy work. Sometimes we had pushback from administration and the institution. But again, our students felt empowered. They felt heard. They wanted to come into the building when before they were afraid to or did not want to because they felt ostracized. So when we heard them and empowered them and worked with them in a collaborative effort, not as they were peers in this situation. Because oftentimes we're at the point we're at in 2021 because adults have failed the next generation. We as adults have failed to change things, to push things truly forward, to address these systemic interconnected issues that exist. So for me, when we're engaged in this work, I never present myself as above my students because I learn from them as well, just like I'm learning from Matthew here today. So we are peers in this work. Yes, I have more wisdom, possibly a little bit more experience. I make noises when I get up because I'm a little older, but we're peers. and we work together. And that is amazing how they see that to, wow, Mr. Clark is at our level. He is not dictating to us. He's listening to us. He's sharing his own truths, and we're working together to design strategies to move forward. And we were able to change the racial equity policy within our building. We created change.org petitions. We reached out to other teachers. There were many emails, articles in the newspaper, so on and so forth. So through this large mobilization, we changed those policies. And though there's still work to do, those students feel truly empowered. So that's just some things I wanted to share because Melissa covered it beautifully. But even in your home, this is not just in an institutional building. It's not, never come from that narrative of blame. Like all men are horrible. Like, yeah, I'm not gonna, sometimes we are. But again, what can you do? You're horrible. You're part of the problem. But this is what you can do to support women, or this is what you can do to support Black people or brown people and being part of the solution. Because if it was up to Black people or brown people, racism wouldn't exist. I can't speak for women, but I'm going to assume if it were up to women, sexism wouldn't exist. But we don't have the power as individuals to end our oppression. We need the oppressor and those who benefit from the oppression to get behind us and support us in ending it. So that's how you kind of articulate that and empower individuals to know that they have a role in this. They're just not going to be ostracized and removed. You have a role in this. So I just wanted to share that.
And from a student perspective, I kind of want to go back to what something Mr. Clark had mentioned earlier. Not all schools are like the children's school, right? So I quickly realized this when I went into high school at the start of the school year. Not all the students are as interested in pursuing justice and all as others. So it was kind of, it's interesting. Like we talk about, is it okay to force students to do these things? At what point is it partisan? At what point is it offensive maybe to some people's views? And we could always say that we are focusing on human rights, not political issues, and that's very valid. That's important. But I also want to argue today that it is okay to force students to take part in social justice programming, because students are forced to live in a racist and anti-just society. So if students are forced to live in an anti-just society, then it's okay for you to force them to pursue justice in school, in my opinion. All students, and this applies to all students, not just students of color, that they are hurt by living in a racist and anti-just society. Not just students of color are hurt by that. All students, all children, youth across the world are hurt by that. So that's something to seriously consider when we talk about, is it okay, or how far can we go with social justice programming? That more applies to other schools than TCS, but one of the ways that is best, especially in public education, and schools that may just have large bodies of people who are so about anti-racist and their affiliations, you can use programming that already exists to work on anti-racism. And that's something I've seen that we've been doing at my high school. We are using these days that we have dedicated to values that the school expects to graduate with as opportunities to work on anti-racist work. And I want to point out that students are already forced to go to these days. They're already forced to participate in this. So if you use things that events and activities that students are already partaking in and are required to partake in, then you are not hurting them. They can't really complain any more than they would otherwise, right? And you are working on what needs to be done, whether they realize it or not. So that's just, some ideas I want to put forth about the acceptance of justice and work like that in schools, especially other than ones like the school.
Thank you all. So we're starting to get questions in. If you do have questions, you can send them to Christina Martin and we'll ask them. If you want to raise your hand, we can also, if you prefer to ask your question verbally, I think we can do that too. The question that we have is, I work in a large suburban high school with a lot of white people who think it's enough to be nice, and that's the equivalent of being not racist. How can I get more colleagues to become more open to their own inherent racism as a result of growing up in a society that centers whiteness? And I think this also applies to parents too, right? It would apply to teachers and staff in schools, but potentially also applies to parents. And so I'm interested kind of who wants to take that?
I mean, I could jump in quickly. I think first and foremost, it's an extremely important question, because again, it matters, right? But I feel like too often we get to a point where we recognize clearly there's issues with, our colleagues and so on and so forth, and we try to change individuals, but all we can do is truly control ourselves, correct? So I think we can't get caught in that idea of how can I get my colleagues to move forward, if that makes sense. We have to focus on moving forward ourselves. And hopefully through the work and through modeling that work, your colleagues can then see the benefit. Because as I stated earlier, we're in a situation to where the narrative has been created to where there are many individuals that are automatically defensive based upon the work that is being done. So they're not necessarily willing to become uncomfortable because again, civility is often chosen over justice. And that's just the way it is oftentimes in society. So what I want to say is, I believe the best modeling and the best tool is through your own efforts, through your own actions. And when your colleagues can see that, then you hope, again, it's not a guarantee, but then you hope that they can truly move forward. And, one analogy I utilize, again, is because too often, I want to articulate this correctly, too often individuals feel like being nice is okay because they're not directly impacted by the level of oppression or systemic issue that exists. But one analogy I often use when I'm trying to create greater empathy and greater collaboration between community members is if you look out your window and you see your neighbor in their time of need and you choose not to open your door, right? It may not happen today or tomorrow, but eventually you're going to be in need and there's going to be no one left to help you because you didn't help your neighbor in that situation. So while you're modeling your actions and hoping that your colleagues pick up on this, you also have to try to position individuals to understand that just because an issue doesn't impact you doesn't mean it doesn't impact you, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't have the direct answer for that because I run into it myself, but I have seen movement just simply by my actions, just simply by other individuals paying attention to the way I move, the way I operate. And then they finally, in a sense, get to a point to where they want to make a difference. So yeah, so I'm sorry I don't have a greater answer for you. But I truly believe in just modeling yourself. And from that, you'll eventually get to a point to where people kind of shift and see the importance of them stepping up.
Yeah, I would agree with Anthony. It made me think of, I was at like a progressive conference years ago, and one of the speakers said like the best teaching happens behind closed doors. And so when we're in this system that is trying to make teachers avoid moving towards justice, you kind of have to do that work on your own. But I would agree with Anthony, kind of doing it and trying things in your classroom and then sharing that with other teachers, but more so in like a collaborative effort. Like, hey, I tried this thing. Do you have any thoughts on it? I remember when I was student teaching, much younger and a little bit more inexperienced, I wanted to bring a lesson to the classroom that was more justice centered. And I kind of made it all about like, I'm doing this, what I'm going to do this. And I was shut down real quickly. So now kind of what I've learned from it is moving towards, seeking out their support, asking their advice on it, and seeing where you can go from there. Like, can the discussion move forward? Then you're also like providing an example of what justice teaching can look like in your school as well. So yeah, I would agree with Anthony. I think it starts in your own classroom, and then inviting others to join in there might be productive. And I also think it's important for like to acknowledge, like, I think a big part of the work right now for white individuals is to do anti-racist work with other white individuals. Like, it shouldn't be up to the people of color to explain systematic racism to white people at this point. So I encourage you to move forward with whatever you can, and I really appreciate the question.
Thanks. I also wanted to say at the children's school, one thing that we did do this summer was do a series of anti-racism circles that continued into the fall and the spring. And we listened to the podcast Nice White Parents, and also the conversation between Isabel Wilkerson and Oprah Winfrey on the book Cast. And I think listening to those podcasts and hearing some of the comments was a useful opportunity to have some mirrors into our own behavior and also impacts on the community. We also looked at other ways in which there's racial detours that we were taking or could be taking, and traps that we could fall into. And all of that was part of our journey as parents and other members of the school to educate ourselves and learn more about ways in which we could be part of the choir to bring others on board to this work, because sometimes it's hard to be a solo singer, but you may not be able to reach everyone. So at least you can build your chorus and make it louder. So another question that we received is a question about collaboration. And the question is, private schools are inherently privileged. So what is their responsibility to collaborate with District 97, schools in Austin? How could Oak Park foster this kind of larger scale social justice education initiative in our community here? Who wants to start?
Miranda, can I just quickly say, I think this is a great question. It is something that I think it's a really big question for many people at the children's school. I hear parents asking this question. I hear teachers asking this question. One of the ways we're constantly trying to make the children's school as accessible as possible through financial aid, through outreach, through recruiting in different places, and just trying to have it be as accessible as possible to as many families as possible. At the same time, though, we recognize that we're in a very privileged position, and I wish we could do more collaborating with public school systems. I think we have a lot we could offer, and also a lot we could learn from working more closely with public schools. But I feel like we sometimes encounter a little bit of a wall, like, well, of course you can do that there because you're a private school. And it's true, it's not wrong, but yet there are many, many challenges and circumstances that we face in common as being teachers, administrators in a K-8 community. And I do think we could do a better job of learning from each other, learning with each other, working together.
Yeah, and I'm going to chime into that too, Christy. This event right now that we have is a good example of how we're reaching out to the community to have this dialogue and conversations about issues that matter. So this is not like a conversation that's only unique to the children's school. This is like everyone starting this dialogue in this pandemic. we're finding newer ways of like how we can support each other, work with each other. So I think folks opening up their doors, inviting like-minded individuals that want to bring about transformative changes to our community. These are some of those smaller conversations that we start and build upon and build collaboratives. That's one of the functions of this community relations committee for the TCS. So this is our very first event to start that sort of conversation and move forward. So it's not going to happen overnight, but as we speak here and discuss, it just kind of opens up the doors to more opportunities.
Yeah, and definitely, I appreciate everyone sharing that. And I can state that, there are many institutions that are closed off. There are many institutions that don't want to open their doors and collaborate, so on and so forth. But I feel one thing that an institution can do that is engaged in the work is broadening the perspective and horizons of not only students, but teachers and families as well. And, one thing that we have in Oak Park is that we're bordered by other communities that don't necessarily have the same level of socioeconomic investment that we have. And oftentimes, I find it surprising, again, no judgment to anyone, but as an adult, I run into adult Oak Parkers that have never been to Maywood or have never been to the Austin community and so on and so forth. So institutions discovering ways to not only necessarily partner with other schools, but other institutions and organizations within these type of communities, not to collaborate in a sense of being a voyeur or a tourist, but truly collaborate in a sense of you have something in Austin or Maywood that can enrich us and bring to the table for us. And we want to be able to support, utilize whatever privilege we have to bring to the table for you all. So I think that's extremely important, getting our students and getting our community further out, broaden our horizon beyond the Oak Park community so we can truly see the socioeconomic disparities that exist in our communities. So I think that's huge. And one thing that I'll definitely continue to collaborate with the Children's School on is we work with the Austin Family and Community Center in the Austin community. So that's even a possibility of collaboration because they're always, particularly with the pandemic, hopefully decreasing with the vaccinations increasing, they're always trying to create opportunities and initiatives to involve youth in their area. So just wanted to throw that out there to broaden beyond just school institutions and look to go outside of Oak Park to gain greater experiences.
Thank you. So next we have a question for you, Matthew. The question is, what is the best strategy you found to interrupt racist comments and behaviors that you've encountered among peers at school or in other places?
Well, I'd say the first most important thing to me is realizing that as a student, the responsibility to deal with those comments isn't exclusive to me. Is part of the administration of the school's job. It is part of the school's community to foster a welcoming community. It is part of the school community to foster a welcoming school. And so basically, I would say first, it's important that a reporting process for incidents of that sort it is widely known. It's known by all the students, all the faculty, all the affiliates of the school. So that's number one, starting with dealing with emotional abuse and hurtful comments. And then the second thing I would say is approaching discussions around it in a effective manner. We don't want to approach conversations trying to change people's mind, but trying to listen to perspectives just as you expect them to listen to yours. Going back to the basics, right? We're going back to what the children's school teaches its youngest students. That's really where you got to start when you're having conversations. What I said, was it hurtful? How can I work to effectively state my point of view without you feeling as though I am impeding on your beliefs or views? So that's step two, make sure that you're able to have an effective conversation. And then the third one, I would say, is having a community of students that are like-minded and how would I say it? Like and share identity traits. So it's important for schools to foster Black student unions, LGBTQ clubs, women's voice clubs, all of these things that allow students to have groups to refer back to, because it's the same thing with the workforce in our country. How does the workforce gain leverage and effectively control its voice in our country through unions? We need groups to refer back to that have power and also, more importantly to me, are supportive of you and your emotions. So you need to have people to go back to, or else it's just, you're not going to be able to take on that challenge against a student or anyone really that said anything hurtful to you without of other people. And so those are the three things that I would say to consider. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
So I have a question about resources, right? People who are looking for just different professional development resources and other resources to support their own learning of colleagues, learning of parents. So one person pointed to Anthony Clark's recommendation for Brenda Tracy. Are there other recommendations? And I mean, I think this is a broad question because I think a lot of people are working on their different journeys. How can they support their own growth, their children's growth, both in the classroom or as parents? So what are your thoughts? Who wants to start?
I think if I'm thinking of just one resource as a teacher that I have depended on, it used to be called Teaching Tolerance, but they recently changed their name to Learning for Justice. And this is a group that was established years ago, and their whole philosophy is about creating curriculum around anti-bias and anti-racist curriculum. So sometimes there's so much out there, especially with everything that happened this summer, like you're just getting flooded with resources. So I just wanted to say one as a teacher that I would recommend if there's someone in here who's kind of just contemplating getting started on the work, that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, somebody shared race conscious dialogues in the chat. You know, that's extremely important too. Dot and her husband, they host that and it's wonderful. So I just wanted to thank you, Christine, for sharing that because that is important as well.
So we're getting a lot of questions. That's what I was kind of scrolling through, and I'm mindful of time. But one question that I think would be helpful is how do you address where students are at developmentally, right? There's a big progression when you're talking about students at the kindergarten level, where students are at the middle school level and at the high school level. So what are some ways that you think are developmentally appropriate ways for both parents and teachers to raise these issues in a progressive way so that learning deepens and grows as the students become able and more mature to be able to process it?
Yeah, I mean, that's an extremely important question. And just as teachers and, school buildings where we're talking about curriculum maps, et cetera, I think we recognize every student, hopefully we recognize every student as an individual within a collective. And as you differentiate instruction, you also have to differentiate this type of work and scaffold. For me, time is limited, of course, but what I do is because I know how I teach and who I am, I reach out to every parent at the beginning of the year to just introduce myself, let them know what I'm involved in, not only within the building, but outside of the building, and share with them what I look to engage throughout the year to gauge their level of comfort, because this is a team effort. It truly takes a village to raise a child. So when I reach out to the parents and begin this relationship building and collaboration, I'm able to identify what level of comfort they have, what backgrounds they may have, how they view the work that I do, or how they view their child within this classroom or within the overall building and institution. So while in my class, we talk about, overarching issues, perfect example. 2 days ago, we were talking about Cesar Chavez and the movement with, the farmers movement and the migrant workers, so on and so forth. And for certain students, particularly it's easier for me because it's online, I provide them with various levels of information. And I also make sure that when I'm presenting, that I always say I'm making I statements, and I want to present information to them, not necessarily as fact, but as information that I want them to take, research themselves, and then come back to me with their own belief systems, with their own I statements, whether they agree with me or not. Because I actually have a student that, I mean, even though, they're 14 years of age, 15 years of age, they're actually a Trump supporter. And again, whoever's, that's their right. So it's not my role, to attack them. It's not my role to try to break them. It's my role to present my beliefs. It's my role to present information. And I hope that they take that and could possibly shift. But if they don't, I'm not going to hang myself up on trying to change this individual student, if that makes sense. I'm working with their parents, work with the student, and try to scaffold my approach in regards to levels of empowerment and levels of ability to, push them to want to, change their environment.
So to Anthony's point, I think relationship building is really important. And I don't necessarily know if this answers the question developmentally, but I feel like you really need, how I approach social justice issues very much depends on the students in front of me. So when I have a classroom studying racial stereotypes that is all white students except one, I'm going to be very mindful of how I work with that one student of color and making sure that they aren't being expected to speak for all the races because they're the only one of color in the room, right? And being very mindful of that in the moment. Also, like just knowing where my students' maturity levels are. Like for that example with the stereotypes project, that reaction is something I expected from that group of students because I knew their emotional well-being at the time, right? And so I think like I really focus on the students in front of me. Like in Matthew's class, I had a classroom full of students who wanted to talk about social justice at every moment. Like every lunchtime, we were talking about something, and so those are the students that are in front of me. So I'm going to adapt my curriculum and have discussions based on what they're telling me. And that's why I think student voice comes back into it. And it's so important in the work we're doing is they're going to tell us, in my experience, like they're going to tell me what they want to learn about. And they're going to tell me what they are comfortable with, but also to what Anthony was saying earlier, like we know this is about becoming uncomfortable and I'll know how to push them. I think a lot of it has to do with just taking the time to build relationships with their students and the families as well, to Anthony's point, and just foster their development with the students that are in front of you. So it definitely changes and shifts, but to me, it's really about knowing the students.
Yeah, I would say I totally agree with Ms. Barone. The students will voice their own level to an extent. They will totally represent like how comfortable they are individually, and that'll play out through their school work and then also the conversations you have, their maturity. But we all know racism and all social justice topics are not they're not exclusive to any age group. They are relevant to everybody at every age, and I would say at the degree. So, while it's kind of a hard thing, so we have to teach children about racism, teach children about social justice at a slower rate because they're children, and there's just certain things that take some maturity to learn. But then at the same time, they be impacted by it at the same level or even more than an adult. So it's a pretty hard thing. And I would point out that a student who, like, it tends to be the case with younger students that the first thing they ask, and I'm not a teacher, but I'm just speaking from what I've seen in young children throughout my life, when you bring up issues of racism and issues of harm to others, the first thing they're going to ask is why. Why do people do this? And why do people want to hurt other people? And so I think it's kind of like we all wonder how to answer that question, because we don't know the answer to that question necessarily either. I mean, we know that people want to have power over others. They're having historic advantages to being over. We know the impact and we know the outcome, but we know that as it is good people and good hearts, we know that that's not right. And so to be asked, why do people do something not right? It's kind of like, well, they do it because that's just who they are. It's like, it's hard to answer that question. So I think you kind of have to leave it to the students to an extent to answer that for themselves. You know, all you can present them with is the advantages that have been created in society, the imbalance inequities that have been an outcome of those things, of racism, and then they will figure out on their own why people do those things. They'll figure out how selfishness goes into play, how greed goes into play, and so you have to present them with the information, with the imbalance, the inequity. Uh, important. That's very important too, because that explains something to them. That explains the conditions that they see around them when they're driving through neighborhoods in Chicago that look different than their own. That explains why things are the way they are. And it's important for children to have that information so that they don't start making negative inferences without guidance. So.
Matthew, you just demonstrated to us all what deep expertise each of our panelists have. So I'm just so grateful for the opportunity we've had to spend together this evening. I'm mindful of time. We have a lot more questions, I think, but I'm also mindful that this program is set to close. And people may have other things to do. So what I would suggest is that we close the program for now, but those of the panelists who are able to stay on and answer questions, and those of you who still have burning questions you want to ask, I would invite everyone to stay on afterwards and we can continue. I am going to kick it to my husband, Ahmed Dola, who is the chair of the Community Relations Committee at the Children's School. We got a question actually to tell us more about the committee, so that's what he's going to do.
All right, thank you. And this is our very first event that we're pretty much launching the community space here. And this is just a forum to have these sort of like conversations with the OPRF community, the school systems, parents, teachers, and folks who have some vested interests with like just making sure some of these really pressing issues of our time, that we have some space and time to kind of have a conversation about it. And in that process, kind of just build a better understanding and just broaden our knowledge and horizon of like some of these questions that we may not have answers to, but just have some form a way to kind of get resources that can help educate us as individuals. So some of the goals that the community relations community has is just more like just focusing on building that stronger alignment and that with the stakeholders of the community, and just sharing, having a lot of more info sharing sessions about some of these. And in the chat, I will put in like a link to the children's school and the board. We pretty much have like meetings once a month. The next one's coming up here next Thursday, and it's open to folks in the surrounding community, parents, to just come in, listen in, just see what we do and who we are, but this is more that kickoff event where we're hearing from our various experts here with Anthony Clark from OPRF. We have the teachers, former students, and a lot of great questions and conversations coming from everyone here. And what I'm also curious to know from these folks who joined this event today, where are you connecting from? Who are you? Are you a parent? Are you a guardian, or you're just interested in events of this sort? And any ideas, suggestions that you have for us for like just the next type of event that we could do and this pandemic, please use that chat right now. Just post some of those ideas, and we want to keep in touch with you, stay engaged, so we can build some sort of like a database of like more folks who are interested about making some transformative changes in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And please join me in giving a virtual round of applause to all of our panelists.